The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome everyone. This is the first in a series of 3 webinars on analysis. The reason for this series, this came about following feedback from a couple of recent webinars we had when Gorkana conducted a series of webinars with the measurement trade body AMEC. And we had the feedback from those webinars that people wanted more practical advice and examples of how analysis can help them to maximize the effectiveness of communications programs. We're going to do this as an interactive session. And what I want to do first, we're going to conduct a little experiment. So we're going to run a quick poll, and we're going to get the questions up now. My question is going to be, what would you see as being the biggest barrier to undertaking an analysis program? And we've got 5 options. 1 is lack of understanding, 2 is access to the right tools, 3 is cost, 4 is don't see the benefit at all, and 5, none. Analysis is an essential part of any comms activity. So I'm hoping if everyone ticks 5, my job is going to be a lot easier. And we can already see some coming through now. Okay. So our top result so far is lack of understanding. So this is probably good news because it gives credibility to the fact we need some webinars on how to do analysis best practice. So who's this series for? Well, firstly, anyone who's currently conducting some form of analysis. They could be doing it themselves, they could be getting their agency to do it, or maybe even outsourcing to a specialist measurement agency. Secondly, people who are thinking about implementing an analysis program. And thirdly, anyone who is interested in making sense of the media and the effect it can have on organizations. Well, that could potentially give us 7 billion people for one webinar, which I suspect we won't get because I don't think our bandwidth can cope. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Hender. I'm the head of Insight and Analysis at Gorkana. Before I was at Gorkana, I was co-owner of Metrica. Metrica was the UK's largest independent analysis agency. I've been involved in media analysis for the last 20 years. Now, 20 years doesn't necessarily make you an expert, but it's hopefully given me enough experience of analysis with real-world clients to be able to give you something useful. So I mentioned this session's interactive. We've already had our poll. We're going to be answering some questions towards the end, so I'd quite like you to send your questions through. You should see it on your screen in front of you. If you want to get into contact with me, my email address is there, paul.hender@gorkana.com, and please feel free to send us messages via Twitter, #GorkanaAnalysis. Also, for a bit of fun, and to see how observant you are, I've deliberately grouped a number of things in my presentation into groups of 3. And I want to run a little competition to see how many you can spot. So using the same mechanism through the question panel, send your answers to me. How many groups of 3 you can spot, and we'll see who's closest at the end. Now, to put you on the same, so we're all on the same page, and to get you started, I've actually already given you 4 examples. If you can see how observant you've already been. There were the 3 navigation tools I've got on the page in front of you. I've mentioned 3 webinars. The name of this webinar episode here is Here Be Dragons, and I've given you 3 types of people the series is for. I'm going to give you bonus marks on why you think 3 is important and what it's important to communications. So there's 3 parts. In analysis, we often talk about measuring outputs and outcomes. Outputs is counting and making sense of what has happened in various media channels, while outcomes is the effect that this has had on the end audiences. So are they aware of our brand? Are they engaged? Do they think positively about it? And of course, importantly, have we inspired them to action? My second and third webinars, respectively, will go into more detail about how to measure outputs and outcomes, how to choose the appropriate metrics, how to measure what matters, how to demonstrate that communications activity has driven business results, and ultimately, how to measure return on investment. But first, here be dragons. Analysis is the fastest growing area of our business. And it's not just us. The whole measurement industry is seeing an unprecedented interest in analysis services. Let me give you some data points to back this up. So AMEC conducts an annual business insight study on the health and direction of the analysis industry. The latest survey, published last month, has shown that the industry has grown by an average of 10% year on year over the last 5 years. Now, if you think about it, this is at the same time we've come through the worst recession since the Great Depression. So that's really strong growth in some bad economic backgrounds. Secondly, a recent PRCA survey showed that 61% of PR agencies are expecting spend on analysis to grow over the next 5 years. And finally, the Cabinet Office, spearheaded by an initiative by the Head of Government Communications, Alex Aitken, has stipulated that analysis is mandatory for all government communications as a means to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. Why is this? Why are we seeing this huge demand? Well, to explain, I would like us to do some time travel. Let's jump into our DeLorean and go back 300 years. 300 years ago, there was a measurement challenge that was so important that in 1714, British Parliament established a prize worth several million in today's money for whoever could solve the problem. This was the age of discovery, and that measurement challenge was longitude. Navigators on ships knew how to measure latitude, which is how far north or south you are, by measuring the angle of the sun at its highest point. But longitude, how far east or west, was much harder. To do this, you needed to know the exact time, local time, compared to that time at a fixed point, such as the Greenwich Meridian in London. This was a huge problem because it meant ships kept getting lost. So this was bad, clearly, if you were on the ship, but it was bad for everyone else. Ships were important because they were the internet of the time. They controlled trade, they controlled security, and above all, they controlled communication. The Longitude Prize was eventually won by John Harrison, who developed a series of state-of-the-art clocks, which are accurate enough to keep time on rough seas over many months. The early adapters of John Harrison's clocks included William Bligh of the Bounty fame and James Cook. If you look at Alaska on this map, you'll see that it actually predates James Cook's survey of the eastern seaboard, so you can see how inaccurate Alaska is. Some historians have argued that solving the longitude problem enabled Britain to establish the world's dominant navy, and having the best navy enabled Britain to establish the biggest empire the world had ever seen. Why am I telling you this? Well, if we jump back into our DeLorean and fast forward 300 years, how do countries and companies manage their empires today? How do you control trade, security, and above all, communication? Well, in a global interconnected world, our largest organizations can have thousands, if not millions, if not billions of stakeholders. So you need mass communication, you need the media. But what is happening to mass media? Well, there's more of it, it's becoming increasingly fragmented. Controlling this becomes much harder, the risks become greater. It's easy to lose our way and get lost. We need help, we need the equivalent of John Harrison's clock. So we need the right tools to help us navigate through this increasingly vast media ocean without crashing onto the rocks. Here be dragons indeed. So a question for you. Who's the most powerful man in the world? Well, a few years ago, many people said it was this man. He referred to the rise of online and social media as a new age of discovery. He said it's difficult, indeed dangerous, to underestimate the huge changes this revolution will bring to build and destroy not just companies, but whole countries. And of course, he should know. The golden rule is never become the story. You could ask the same to Andy Coulson. It's caused political change. Social media has been central to initiating the Arab Spring, the revolution in the Ukraine, and the recruitment of ISIS members in Iraq, including from my hometown of Cardiff, rather disconcertingly. We know of the reputation damage to BP with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, Cooperative Bank with everyone's favourite Crystal Methodist, and Toyota, that brand that stood for reliability, having numerous recalls. At Gorkana, we've been involved in helping our clients measure themselves during some of the biggest recent media stories. Let me give you 3 examples to bring this to life. IKEA. Why IKEA? How can anyone be negative about IKEA? Well, apart from, of course, when you're trying to build their furniture. Actually, as a quick aside, there's academic research from one of my heroes, a guy called Dan O'Reilly, who's professor of behavioral economics at MIT, that shows that despite people hating the experience of building IKEA furniture, it's the furniture they may feel most attached to after they've built it, and not just because they've had an accident with a nail. There's a cognitive bias towards feeling positive about things that they've invested effort in. He referred to this as the IKEA effect. Apparently, when cake mix was invented in the 50s, it didn't sell very well. When egg was removed from the recipe, which forced housewives to add their own, sales took off because the housewives felt better as a result of the additional investment they were making. And it was food that caused a big problem for IKEA when they were thrown headlong into the horse meat scandal, when it emerged that their Swedish meatballs had tested positive for horse DNA. Now, you would have thought that this was bad enough, but the very next month it emerged that coliform bacteria had been detected in a batch of their almond cakes. Now, coliform bacteria is a very common type of bacteria. It's found in many environments. In fact, there's a high chance that there are some in the air around you now. But it can also be found in feces. So you can guess the angle which our level-headed and balanced media took. Yes, sewage cakes in the Daily Mail. Well, we measured this. We measured sentiment over the course of a year. We've got here broken down by month, tracking favourability, breaking down by favourable coverage, neutral coverage, and unfavourable coverage. And you can see the first 2 months here where the horse meat scandal kicked off, followed by the almond cakes. But what's interesting here is the negative coverage died away pretty quickly. It didn't really cause any long-term business damage, because by the end of the year, IKEA had managed to post increased sales and strong growth. So in this example, we're looking at evolution of coverage over many months. But of course, often things change dramatically over days or even hours. Take another example. Look at Barclays. During the LIBOR scandal, when it emerged that Barclays had deliberately fixed the interbank lending rate, we were producing updates every couple of hours. We were tracking coverage in real time across social media and mainstream media. And here is the day that the story broke, that Barclays were to be fined that £290 million. We tracked sentiment, favourable, neutral, and unfavourable, and how this was evolving hour by hour, where the conversation was happening, where were the hotspots, and we can see in the UK and US in particular. We identified the main themes. And we also looked into who was being influential. We identified and signposted the most influential post. For example, Sky News, call for Barclays boss to go after 290 million fine, 367,000 followers, followed by the Radio 4 Today programme, 150,000 followers. If senior management knew what was going on, they deserve all they're going to get, which is a quote from the RBS chair, Sir George Mathewson. And finally, my favourite, Charles HRH, who's not the real Prince Charles, it's a spoof account. But look, Charles HRH actually has more followers than the Radio 4 Today Twitter account. Give the man a gun and he can rob a bank. Give the man Barclays Bank and he can rob the world. It's generated more than 1,000 retweets. Now, despite this close attention, the media frenzy soon became uncontrollable. Within days, Bob Diamond, the CEO, had resigned, as had the chairman and the chief operating officer, and the share price had fallen by more than a third. So why the difference? Why do the number of potentially serious health issues not cause much of a dent in one organisation? Well, something that's much more esoteric, something that most people did not know existed, let alone care about, interbank lending rates, can bring a company to its knees. Well, first, IKEA handled the communications to the media very well. They were quick to get spokespeople into the media to reassure the public that they took food safety very seriously and that strong checks and balances were being put in place. Indeed, IKEA takes part in a multi-brand journalist survey. Over the course of these months, IKEA moved from ranking 8th to ranking 1st, largely as a result of how they responded to the issue in the eyes of the journalists. But secondly, there's this idea of core competence. You don't go to IKEA to buy meatballs and almond cakes. But what you want from a bank more than anything else is trust and integrity, something that were already in short supply following the financial crisis. And there's a really important point here, that integrity is not a marketing message. It can't just come from the communications team. It's something that needs to run through the whole organization. The media world is evolving from one dominated by paid media to one dominated by earned media. And that means you can no longer buy the message, you need to earn it. And the best way to do this is to walk the talk. If what you say and how you behave is different, then you'll be found out. This is the type of leadership that the new Chief Executive, Anthony Jenkins, has been bringing to both internal and external audiences. He's estimated that it will take 10 years to rebuild Barclays' reputation, which gives you some sense of how long it takes to build a reputation compared to how quickly it can be lost. Earlier this year, the south of the UK had the wettest winter since records began. The resulting flooding caused widespread disruption, misery for thousands who had to abandon their homes and deal with the cost of the aftermath. And day by day, this became a huge and multifaceted media story. We work with DEFRA, which is the Department for the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs within UK government. DEFRA has established a horizon scanning unit, which is headed up by a lady called Elaine Phillips. Their job is to identify upcoming risks and opportunities to enable government to prepare and act where relevant. The intelligence we provide informs short-term response as well as longer-term policy making, and it goes to senior officials within the department, across government, including Number 10. How do we do this? Well, we constantly monitor social and mainstream media using our social media platform. We have up to 60 search queries running at any one time, and the data is presented via live dashboards, as you can see here. Now, in the media, things change, of course, and we have to react likewise. If a new issue occurs, we set up a new dashboard within 2 hours, and we proactively alert the DEFRA team about campaigns and conversations that are gaining momentum, which are not currently being considered. In the floods, for example, the focus of the conversation shifted dramatically between insurance, energy companies, floodwater damage, warnings, investment, flood defences. Do you remember the dredging debate? Climate change and comparisons with other countries like Holland. So as well as keeping tabs on that, we also needed to identify how those conversations varied across social media channels and to identify and understand the top influencers. Now this was important because the data showed that the top 20 influencers actually accounted for 60% of the total conversation. Developments in technology have now enabled us to look in more detail at certain demographics. So from male and female splits down to more specific things such as the actual interests and professions of those commentating. In addition, we can show how mainstream and social media interact with each other. For example, here by showing the mainstream media stories that are being shared via Twitter. The work that we're doing with DEFRA has been singled out by Alex Aitken as leading the way in this field. And other departments are now seeking to follow suit. It's generated interest in both marketing and national media channels. And last month, we were delighted because it was recognized at the analysis industry's annual awards. We're out of more than 100 entries. DEFRA won the Grand Prix Platinum Award for the best overall example of media analysis. And here were some judges' comments. So user-friendly, informative and valuable early warning system with a strong blend of insights and quantitative data. Smart, innovative and transformational impact on client comms and stakeholder engagement and policy. This program is noteworthy as it is using data to identify trends and inform actions, which is a critical part of public relations and communication management that needs to be developed across the profession. But what I think is important here is that you can see that the recognition is not because of some clever measurement methodology, but that it's useful. It's a program that turns data into insights, and those insights could drive activity, and to do so in a timely fashion. So the question here, if you want to embark on an analysis program or improve an existing one, how do you approach this? Now, you don't necessarily need to want to undertake the industry's best media analysis program. You shouldn't necessarily aspire to that, but you should aspire to making it useful. And I've got an acronym to help remember what the main building blocks of an analysis program are. And I'll go through some of these now. The S stands for stakeholders. You should never undertake an analysis activity until you understand who it is for. So, is it for the communications team, for example? Is it a PR agency? Or are you using it to inform senior management of the effectiveness of your organization's communications practice? Now, we're seeing an increased integration with other business functions. For example, the broader marketing communications team, and even business insights and customer insights teams. Sorry, business intelligence and customer insights teams. Particularly how mainstream and social media relate to customer behavior. Now, understanding who the analysis is going to be used by will help shape everything else. Second, content and coding. The quality of any research is really dependent on the quality of the sample, and this applies equally to media analysis. In this case, content really is king. It's a case of garbage in, garbage out. So we need to be making sure that we are analyzing relevant content. And to do this, we need to understand how our monitoring service, if you have a monitoring service, then links to your analysis service. I've seen many examples when a customer might change their keyword on the monitoring brief, not knowing that that will directly affect what goes into the analysis. So you see these huge changes in trends, and it's just caused by a change in the reading brief rather than any change in what's happened in the media. Choose your channels. What channels should you include? Should you include print, online, broadcast? And the big question, of course, is should you include social? My recommendation is to include social wherever possible, since understanding how mainstream and social interact is often really crucial to making sense on how you manage the communications. A very common question that's asked, and it'll be interesting to see if this comes through in the questions today, is should I use an automated system, or am I better off with using human beings to code the coverage? Well, despite advances in technologies, computers still find difficulty in accurately assessing sentiment or judging the nuances of message pickup, for example. But there's often a balancing act between the quality, the cost, and time. But of course, this doesn't have to be an either-or. In many analysis programs, we recommend a blend of both. For example, you might want to have human analysis on national mainstream media because of the relative importance, but you might want to use automatic tagging for social media because there's so much of it, and you need to turn the information around really quickly. Finally, many people toy with the idea of doing it themselves, thinking this will save money. This is, of course, an option, but it can be a false economy. If you use an external agency, they generally have better systems and they have the experience, which leads not only to higher quality, but to more efficient analysis. Well, of course, the DIY route distracts from what the team's core focus is, which is executing the PR strategy. Since analysis can be subjective, an external agency adds that third-party credibility, which is essential if you're measuring performance of your team or your agency. My O is for objectives, because I'm amazed at how often people embark on an analysis program without really understanding the objectives of the exercise. So it's worth taking time to write down what it is you want to achieve. There are many things that you can measure, and we'll look at some of these in more detail in the next session. But measuring everything can lead to spiraling costs and what I call paralysis by analysis. There's too much, you can't see the wood for the trees. I recommend choosing the right metrics by linking them back to your communications objectives. And again, this is something I'll focus on in the next webinar when we look at measuring what matters. We need to understand what good looks like. Now, we can do this either by measuring ourselves against competitors, or we can establish benchmarks for ourselves. And this can help us to set targets in the future. For example, if we measure ourselves this last quarter and 60% of our coverage is positive, we can set ourselves a goal of aiming for 70% next quarter. R, reporting. What's the right reporting format? Well, it depends on our stakeholders. So, for example, you could have quarterly or monthly offline reporting, which often works for senior management who are busy and often have monthly or quarterly reporting cycles themselves. You can not necessarily stick with ongoing quarterly or monthly offline reporting. You could have campaign reports. That may be more appropriate when you're dealing with a more campaign-oriented communications program. Increasingly, there are interactive dashboards available. We've shown some earlier on for DEFRA. You can have access to daily summaries as well as feeds of content, which may be better for the day-to-day team who are at the coalface of what's going on and need to react accordingly. Finally, we're seeing an increasing demand for data feeds to feed into other parts of the business. And I alluded to this earlier on, but we need to give information to the marketing, business intelligence, and customer insights function. They're increasingly integrating data sources from across the business to understand how the media is affecting customers. Finally, E is for evaluate. Evaluate the evaluation. Why am I saying this? Because the best measurement is it's iterative, and it changes as the strategies, the issues, and the media landscape change. The work we did for DEFRA was earmarked as best practice partially because it reflected and adapted to the changes when they happened. My recommendation is to have regular review points to steer the analysis program. So after the first report is usually a key time, and maybe with quarterly review points after this. I'd recommend keeping the analysis flexible so you can react where appropriate and above all, keep it relevant. So bringing this all back together again, we have our acronym SCORE: stakeholders, content and coding, objectives, reporting, and evaluate. Now, last weekend, I took the kids to the cinema, and we went to see How to Train Your Dragon 2 from DreamWorks. If you get your building blocks right, then hopefully you too will have a greater understanding of how to train your dragons. In my next session, I want to look at measuring what matters. We will look in more detail at both output and outcome metrics and how they relate to understanding and managing communications. We'll look at how to choose the right metrics for your circumstances with some practical examples of how some of our customers use this in the real world. Right, we're now going to have a look at what questions we've got coming through. So bear with us for a second. We haven't got any. Oh, and actually we've got a couple. Here we go. I've got one, which is how much should you spend on analysis? I think that's a really good question because the cost argument comes up quite a lot. One of the things about cost is there is an element of how long is a piece of string on this. We've seen analysis programs range from, well, at its cheapest it could be a few £100, and to its most expensive it could be a few £100,000. A few years ago, PR Week ran a proof campaign to promote analysis, and they suggested that 10% of your campaign should be spent on analysis. I think with cost, people have a tendency to look at the overall cost rather than the opportunity to grow your overall budget by proving effectiveness. It's quite often important to show how the effectiveness of your communications, which it enables you to make the argument for greater budget. And I'd actually recommend you can take the opportunity of the fact that analysis can cost not a lot and it can cost a lot. There's a flexibility there. So you can actually start quite small. You could start maybe with a campaign and scale upwards. Another question here, what tools do you recommend? Well, I'm going to be biased. I'm going to say Gorkana's tools, clearly. But I think this links into what I was saying earlier on around what methodology you want to use in terms of content and coding. You can use DIY tools, and Gorkana offers do-it-yourself tools, but with the caveats I mentioned earlier on, that it could distract from what you should be doing as your day job. Alternatively, you can use an agency to do it for you. And I would recommend that because you generally get better quality and they tend to be more efficient. Another question, how has fragmentation of online and offline channels affected how you measure and evaluate PR? Okay, that's a very good question. And I guess I've alluded to this earlier on, that the fragmentation has made the controlling media much harder. But of course, it's also made measuring coverage much harder. And that's why in many examples, you need a multifaceted approach. So the example with DEFRA was that we used primarily a social media monitoring tool, which enables us to react in real time because we have the query set up and we can track coverage against key topics and see what's positive and negative. But for other campaigns and other programs, we'd recommend a combination maybe of social media monitoring tools with mainstream analysis. I would make this point that it's the combination of measuring the interaction between social and mainstream that is really important. Yes, a very good question. How do you recommend tracking client pressures with regards to providing monetary values for coverage? And I think this kind of alludes to the traditional way of measuring evaluation, which is the advertising value equivalent. So there's another question here, which is why are advertising value equivalents still widely used when AMEC has been campaigning against them? Interestingly, usage of advertising value equivalents has dropped. So AMEC runs a survey, which is what I mentioned right at the outset of this webinar. And the usage of AVs has dropped. This year, it's, I think, 31% of AMEC members regularly use them, and last year, I seem to remember that 40% of AMEC members regularly used AVs, so they are going down. I think the challenge is that they're easy to produce and they have a pound sign in front of them, which makes people think that it tells you the value of coverage. There are alternatives. For example, you can do a cost per thousand. So how much would it cost to reach 1,000 people or how much has it cost to reach 1,000 people in your campaign, which is actually how other marketing disciplines measure themselves. It's a way of measuring like with like. We're going to look at AVs and alternatives to AVs and linking it to return on investment in my third webinar, so a bit of a plug for that. Please, can you repeat the integrity comment and what this means for analysis? This wasn't really a point about analysis, it was a point about communication. And, well, it's a point about analysis in the sense that analysis should inform a business about the realities of risk. And I think one of the challenges, and Barclays found it to its cost, was that you can't buy your marketing messages. You have to live them. And because the way the media world works now, it's incredibly transparent. You have to walk the talk. You have to live and breathe what you do. So the analysis can actually highlight those risks. And I think if you're a communications professional, it's incumbent on you to reinforce to senior management that it's the whole business's responsibility to act in accordance with the values of the overall business. And finally, do you offer guidelines for what you would define as a successful PR campaign? Absolutely, and that is a brilliant plug for my next session next week, because the answer to that is it depends, and it depends on your objectives. So what we'll do next time is, I've got a great example of this for the Stroke Association, where we helped them, and this was recognized in the AMIC Awards as best practice, where we identified what the key KPIs that would show what a successful campaign would be, and it was linked back to the original business objectives. So it really much depends on what the business objectives are. And finally, I don't know if anyone has answered my question about groups of 3, but for those that were interested, when I counted them earlier on, I got 27. Now, why is this important? I've got no idea. It just seems to be one of those things that if you group things into 3, people remember when they communicate. I think someone mentioned 7. No, 27 I got. And you get it in stories. You know, Goldilocks and the 3 bears, the 3 little pigs. My favourite, the 3 Billy Goats Gruff. In speeches, I came, I saw, I conquered, friends, Romans, countrymen. Tony Blair's favourite, education, education, education. And of course in slogans you have liberté, égalité, fraternité, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the motto of the Olympics, faster, higher, stronger. So it seems to help reinforce communication. Of course, communication is what we're all about. So that's it all from me. Thank you very much for listening. I will welcome all to my next session, which is on Wednesday the 23rd of July. That's in 2 weeks. So thank you very much, and goodbye for now.